Hello and welcome to Truth Be Known, stories about how modern data leaders seek truth in an uncertain world. Today's episode features an interview with Dr. Catherine Williams, Global Head of IQ at Qualtrics, an experience management software platform. Catherine has extensive background in data science and quantitative analytics. Prior to Qualtrics, Catherine served as Chief Data Scientist and Chief Data and Marketplace Officer at AppNexus and Xandr, which is part of AT&T. Catherine holds a Ph.D. in mathematics from the University of Washington, and she's also held postdoctoral fellowships at Stanford and Columbia Universities. On this episode, Catherine discusses growing a machine learning approach to unstructured data, using data to get to the why of customer behavior, and following your local happiness gradient. We'll get more into that shortly, but before that, here's a brief word from our sponsor.
Truth Be Known is brought to you by Talend. A leader in data integration and data integrity, Talend enables every company to find clarity amidst the chaos. Talend Data Fabric brings together in a single platform all the necessary capabilities that ensure enterprise data is complete, clean, compliant, and readily available to everyone who needs it throughout the organization. Learn more at talend.com. That's TALEND.com.
And now please enjoy this conversation between Dr. Catherine Williams, Global Head of IQ at Qualtrics, and your host, Rob Norman.
Welcome to Truth Be Known. I'm Rob, and today I'm joined by Catherine Williams. Catherine, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start with what we start with normally, which is just for people who aren't familiar with yourself. Could you give us a bit of an intro into yourself and your background?
Sure. So I'm the global head of IQ at Qualtrics, which means that I am a leader of a division of the engineering organization that focuses on IQ, which is, stands for intelligence quotient. But for Qualtrics, it means the center of all things analytical and intelligence. So it includes analytical features and functionality, as well as our machine learning team and platform.
Fantastic. And before we dive deeper into what you're doing at Qualtrics, could you give us a little bit of a background to what led you to Qualtrics? Because I think that you started your career off in academia. Is that right?
That's right. So I started off intending to be a professor of math. I wanted to do research and teaching. So my career got off a little bit funny. I didn't go to grad school right away. I took a small detour and worked at Microsoft as a tester for a couple of years. But then I went to grad school and pursued that academic career. And I got my Ph.D. and studied general relativity and black holes and did a couple of postdocs. And then along the way, even though I did like the research and the teaching, I realized that career-wise, I was miserable. And so I jumped into industry, into a small ad tech startup. And that was a really fortunate move for me. It scratched the itch, and I wound up growing up with that company. And that's how I got into the data business. I went from pen and paper math to, empirical data and all that entails. It was a good move.
Fantastic. And
then I went from that ad tech company to Qualtrics.
So entered industry and has never looked back.
I've looked back a little. There are some things I miss. I still love math, but I think that there's a beautiful synergy now, shall we say?
Right. There's a beautiful intersection between what you're doing and obviously your background.
Exactly. Yeah, they come together nicely.
Excellent. So head of IQ at Qualtrics, you mentioned like sort of top level, but could you just dive deeper into your role at Qualtrics and what that looks after?
Sure. So first, let me tell you just a little bit about Qualtrics for those who are not familiar. We are a SaaS company, software as a service, providing what we call the business OS for experience. That is to say, we help companies understand the experiences of their customers or their employees or their prospective customers, and an operating system for them to gather all of that data and understand it and then act on it, closing the loop and making their businesses or sometimes governments or schools or whatever they might be better. And so then the IQ organization is part of that platform, and it plays this really critical role of bringing together that data and deriving insights. And sometimes that could be as simple as some BI, so we can provide some visualizations. Sometimes it's providing deeper statistical understanding or natural language understanding for unstructured text or time series understanding, and then connecting that all back to the rhythm of business for our customers so that they can actually then act on that understanding and improve the experiences of their constituents. So I love where I sit in the company. It's in my opinion, the most interesting part. It's kind of the brain of the organization, if you will. And we've been able to really grow a big machine learning approach just in the last few years, which is really exciting as well.
Talk me a little bit more about the machine learning, because that sounds really interesting.
Sure. So we started off, the biggest need when I joined the company a couple of years ago was really wrapping our arms around the unstructured data that we get from our customers. Some of this is solicited in the form of surveys. Qualtrics started decades ago as a survey company. We've now branched well beyond that. But a lot of what's captured about customers' experiences is in their own words, either in response to an open text feedback in a survey or in social media or a product review or what have you. And so if you want to be able to take action and understand that data, you need tools for understanding it. So that was the tip of the spear for our machine learning platform, was developing those natural language understanding capabilities. And what's fortunate is that the field in NLP has just been, I mean, it's having sort of a watershed moment the last few years in terms of what it's capable of doing, what some of these large language models and the AI is capable of deriving. So we've been able to take advantage of that and build out a system that's able to really extract a lot of meaningful information from that open text. And then we've broadened from there to other types of machine learning and more structured and so forth. And it's really just, it's kind of an exponential growth phase right now, like all the different opportunities. Once you have the infrastructure, there's lots of opportunities to apply machine learning for all kinds of business problems.
Yeah, and let's dig into that a little bit. So obviously, what you're doing is sitting at the center, but ultimately you're solving for customers' business problems and ultimately providing the experience data. So what are those business problems that really Qualtrics and the data that you're mining and providing as insights, what's that really helping to solve for them?
Well, taking a step back for a second, all companies and institutions in our economy, in our world that I'm aware of, touch humans in some way or other. They, at a minimum, have humans working for them. We don't have AI driven companies yet. And they almost always have, human constituents and human customers and so forth. And so when you think about those companies trying to operate and do what they do well, they derive lots of data about what those humans are doing and what are the transactions and what are the facts of their interactions and touch points with those humans. And that's really valuable information. And there's great infrastructure for understanding that and operating on that. I think that's what people often mean when they say data driven decisions. It's just what are the objective facts of those interactions with the humans in your business. But that's missing a huge component, right? A lot of what drives human behavior is their subjective experience, and that doesn't enter into the equation very often. And so, this has certainly been known for some time. Companies have measured customer satisfaction or the net promoter score, which is how likely are you to recommend this business or product to a friend or neighbor. And so they try to get some sense of how people are feeling, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so what we're doing is just providing those tools to derive a lot more information there and really understand the whys of your behavior, not just your customers did these things, but why did they do those things? How are they feeling about it? How might that affect their loyalty or their future purchasing behavior or whatever that might be?
And so I would imagine Qualtrics is mostly talking to marketing departments. Is that the customer that you're typically talking to, or does it vary way beyond that, in fact?
It varies widely. So we have a number of product lines that speak to different parts of businesses. In fact, if you think about it, all parts of a business have some experiences that they focus on. So, yes, marketing departments, absolutely. We're very interested in brand experiences. What are people's perceptions and feelings about brands even before they've purchased? Product experiences, customer experience. Like, how did you feel about that phone call with a customer service representative? Even if the company's internal system says that the problem was resolved, did the customer feel like their problem was resolved? That's a really important data point for understanding their future behavior. So, call center, some of those kinds of programs, but also HR. Chief HR officers for employee experience. We're undergoing the great resignation right now, and it's really important for companies to understand how their employees are feeling and why they're doing the things that they're doing, why they're making those decisions. There's actually lots of different applications where we're going big into healthcare right now. There's a lot around patient experience that's really interesting, and where we hope that we can really understand and move the needle there as well. So it's pretty far reaching.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like it. And I think that one of the interesting things is just how varied and how important and how much data is permeating every aspect of business these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said before, objective data permeates all aspects of business these days. And I think we're developing good tools and systems for managing that. And it's missing this critical additional component, which I think Qualtrics is hoping to provide experience in the subjective.
And I should imagine Qualtrics is using Qualtrics' own product internally at Qualtrics. And how do you experience data on your own team at Qualtrics?
Ever since I've joined the company, we've used our own employee experience products, which is really important for me. I am a people leader first and foremost. My team has close to 80 people now, and it's really important for me to understand what's going on, what's the heartbeat there, and is that team happy and successful, and what's going on with them. So, our employee experience tools are very useful, but we're also dog fooding our own customer experience products to understand how our customers perceive us. And so, my team gets customer satisfaction feedback and NPS scores. And we get our open text responses about our own open text capabilities, which is sort of meta, if you will. And we analyze those to understand where we need to be providing better experiences for our customers using our product. So there's a number of different ways we call ourselves customer zero, that we're trying to make sure that we are the first users and understand how to do it well.
Being data driven is the goal of pretty much every company these days, and Qualtrics obviously is providing a data product. And so, do you consider Qualtrics to have embraced data entirely as an organization and is thoroughly data driven, or do you feel like Qualtrics is still on a journey to become fully data driven?
If I'm honest, I think we're still on a journey. Qualtrics pioneered this experience management domain. I think they invented the term before I joined. And it wasn't really a practice previously to manage experiences of all your constituents this way. And so I think Qualtrics itself is learning how to use these products, how to close those loops, how to operate in a rhythm that is driven by this data in a really meaningful way. And we're trying to bring that understanding to our customers also. But I think it's a journey for us all. It's not clear how to make good data driven decisions, even with objective data, revenue data, financial data, transactional data. And then when you add this confusing subjective human element, it maybe becomes harder in some ways. But at the same time, you have a richer picture. And so you can get more of an understanding of the whys of what's driving the business.
In terms of the journey that Qualtrics is on in terms of becoming ever more data driven, what are some of the obstacles that are in place that need to be addressed to becoming more data driven?
Well, I think Qualtrics faces some of the same challenges that our customers do in just needing to effectively bring together experience data with operational data. And operational data is what I'm referring to as that objective data. So we're building out systems that we ourselves then are using for ourselves, as I've described, to combine that X and O data, including what we call our experience ID, which is like all transactions and all CRM information for customers, all their transactional information. We pull that in and then marry that up with the experience data so that you can have that robust picture. That's hard. There's a lot that's required. You need to understand what's in that data. Just how do you build platforms to do that effectively and drive those insights? There's a lot of dots that need to connect. I think that's the same challenge that we're facing internally is the same challenge we're trying to solve for our customers. And we're making strides and we're seeing some light.
Yeah, it's a journey that every company is on, and I think every company is facing similar challenges to becoming more data driven. One other aspect which seems to be on a lot of people's minds right now is having the organization becoming more and more data literate. How do you support your own employees becoming more and more data literate?
Data literacy is a huge challenge. And I think that the approach that Qualtrics has taken that I also adopt is to start by identifying the goals and then put them in quantitative terms, define metrics, and then work your way ironing backward from there. So that if everybody understands that there's this quantitative goal in place, then you have to work your way back to what the data that rolls into that goal is. So, for instance, if we're going to improve adoption across these three suites of products by X%, we have to then derive the sort of the next level down metrics of, well, what are the pieces of that and what are the whys and so forth. And so just by asking the questions and framing them and identifying the goals in crisp quantitative terms, I think enforces at least, or at least points people in the right direction to being literate. I think you can't necessarily enforce the level of data literacy. I would love it if everyone were statistically literate, and that's not going to happen. I mean, we're not there as a society generally, but you can at least frame the questions and the goals that way. And Qualtrics does that. Even at the company level, we have company big bets that are articulated in specific metric terms, and then that flows throughout the rest of the organization.
What do you think are some of the obstacles that companies in general face when they're trying to make data-driven decisions?
I think that biggest challenge really comes in pulling together the right set of data and marrying it up in such a way that you can derive the right insights. And some of that is exactly what my team focuses on. And so, for instance, we have a client that we've been working on with a sort of an early version of some new functionality, a large retail client who has a number of stores spread across a region. And they know that their bottom line is tightly correlated with their net promoter score of their customers and their different scores in their different their stores rather. So they measure net promoter score with little surveys, that they send out and so forth, but they have no way of knowing how to take action on that. So we have been providing the tools to monitor the time series of net promoter scores across all these different scores. And if we detect an anomaly, we can surface that and dive in and say, why are we seeing an anomaly? Oh, here are the topics and themes that are emerging from some of the responses among detractors in this region, and very quickly surface something up so that they can then turn around and on the business, on the operational side, say, oh, yeah, it turns out there was something going on in this particular store. And sure enough, it was causing issues. And so those challenges of getting that feedback loop for what's going on both the business and experience side that's going to be affecting the business, but getting it, as a leading indicator or like as in a timely fashion versus as a lagging indicator when you just see later that your business results aren't there. I think that's the challenge, is closing that feedback loop. So pulling together the experience and operational data and then providing the timely closed loop processes or tools to close that loop. I think that's the main challenge. And it varies, I think, by use case, by industry, by problem, by metric. And so providing general purpose tools to help our customers with that becomes interesting intellectual challenge for us at Qualtrics.
And some of the other challenges of providing those insights and those data in real time is also the reliability of the data, the trustworthiness of the data. How do you tackle that? How are you ensuring that the output is actually reliable, trustworthy, and dependable, that people can take decisions on?
Well, in a lot of cases, you don't necessarily have a concern of like fraudulent behavior. So, for instance, if you're extracting call center data and you just have call transcripts, in general, those calls are going to be real humans and it's all valid. Everything that happens in those calls is something that you want to know as a business leader. But in other cases, you're right, there is an opportunity for invalid data to enter into the picture, especially things like paid panel surveys where people are getting paid to respond to surveys, which still happens in market research pretty frequently. And so we are, in fact, my machine learning team is working on, and there exist tools already, and we're working on enhancing them, ways to detect whether people are, we call them speeders and cheaters, whether they're just, A on a multiple choice, or finding other ways to write garbage, or just, gaming the system, or whether they're bots and so forth. In my previous world in ad tech, one of the teams that I led was an anti-fraud team, and we were detecting ad fraud, bots and ad farms and all kinds of malicious behavior there. And it felt very spy versus spy, and kind of had to keep ahead of the bad guys kind of thing. From that experience, I know that there's lots of ways to detect with machine learning and other analytical tools sort of behavior that just doesn't match up to valid. There are ways to detect sort of valid and invalid human data that we can then use to clean and filter before it goes into our systems.
Is there also a system side in terms of when taking data from multiple sources, that's also something that can cause challenges from a data quality perspective? Or is it mainly when it comes to the speeders and cheaters?
Well, what I just described was the potential for the experience data to be invalid or poor quality in whatever way. But anytime we're trying to marry up operational data with experience data and we're working with our clients, there's a lot of challenges there depending on what data that they have. And so that's a huge part of what my team thinks about is how best to pull in data and validate it so that we can marry it up and derive valid insights. And that's going to vary case by case. Different institutions have different data quality and schematized differently or gappy or whatever it is. There's a lot of messiness out there in the world, and because we want to use that data, we have to then address some of that challenge as well.
Can you dig deeper into how you're going about addressing the messiness of that data?
My general thesis here, as it is with developing all products, is to start with a human in the loop. Try to have humans solve the problem first and then see what the generalizable patterns are where you can harden some of the playbook and then maybe turn it into a product. So, right now, for instance, we have a product that we call Predict IQ. And the idea here is just for customers to be able to pull in whatever data, operational data they have supporting an operational metric that they care about. Often it's customer churn, it could be employee attrition, it could be customer lifetime value, et cetera. So any operational data that's relevant for that, we marry it up with experience data on our side, and then we build predictive models so that they can, have a model that then predicts customer churn based on both operational and experience signals. And they can do that in real time and act on that if they want to. And the challenge with that product is pulling in the operational data. It varies by customer. There is no turnkey way of doing it. If we say, format your data exactly like this and drop it in, nobody will use it. So, part of the product is to have data scientists in the loop consulting with those clients and working to make sure that they can get the data into a form where it can marry up. So, it's a very human and manual process for that product right now. And my thesis is that over time we will start to see the patterns of what we can build to be able to handle that more programmatically and scale out more broadly. But we have to see it firsthand with our human brains, our human neural networks before we can build the neural networks to do it.
Makes complete sense. When we're talking about experience data, and we were talking earlier about the obstacles that some of the companies face when trying to make those data-driven decisions, in your experience, do you think it's more difficult for companies to make decisions based on experience data, or there's no real more difficult challenge with experience data than other sets of data?
Well, I think that it's more challenging if you don't have the right tools, and that's obviously the problem that Qualtrics is seeking to solve. But once you do have the tools to pull that data in and pull it up to the same level of analysis and visibility as other types of data, I actually think it's better. I think it makes it easier for companies to make data-driven decisions because they get more of the why. And so they don't have to be guessing. I mean, how many times have you stared at some data and said, I wonder why it's like that? Like, I don't understand this data. What story is it trying to tell me? I don't get it and I don't trust it enough to make a decision just based on this data because it's too weird. But if you have the right tools and you have the right experience data and you say, oh, that's because there's been this issue with customer service over here. And that explains, okay, so now I know, now I feel empowered to go make a decision. So I actually think that it makes a huge impact to being able to make data driven decisions once you get it into the picture.
So it's really about being able to link data that's happening in different places and pulling it all together so you can get an overall holistic view that tells you the why.
Exactly. And not to wax too philosophical, but right, the humans that we all interact with, they have behaviors and they do things in the objective world and they have their experiences and their subjective experiences. And if you want to be able to really operate in that world of all these idiosyncratic humans, you have to understand both at some level to really be able to make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you're working with a talented team of technical experts. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the talent conversation. And when you're thinking about right now and the competition for talent, how is that impacting your team? And do you think that AI and data science teams are seeing the same trend as a broader workforce?
Well, it's incredibly competitive to hire top talent for sure. And I don't know if that's the trend that you're speaking of, but that certainly is a concern. It's a very hot topic, though, a hot field. So there are a lot of new entrants. There's a lot of interest, and it's also very competitive for those top players. I think the good fortune that we have at Qualtrics is we're at a stage right now where people who want to have an impact can. And so that's very exciting. If you just want to go refine the F1 score of some algorithm embedded deeply into the Google system by, like 0.05, then you can, but do you feel like that really has a big impact on the world? Maybe not. So I feel like that's our edge in this competition for talent, is that people can come and actually make a pretty big difference right now with what we're building out. It's also really exciting just seeing some of this new technology, these new techniques, the new natural language innovations coming to life.
Yeah, it's super compelling. We're just going to move to the final segment, and wanted to talk a little bit about what's the best piece of career advice you've ever gotten.
Early on in my math career, when I actually started my math career in Texas at UT Austin and then moved to UW for personal reasons. The graduate advisor told me to follow my local happiness gradient, which is a very nerdy math way of just saying kind of follow your passion, but somehow framing it in math terms made it feel more authoritative to me, perhaps. And then later in my career, a wise CIO reminded me to always find those things in your day to day that nourish you. And I think I'll take two pieces and add that into one piece of career advice that has been meaningful for me, is just to find those things that light me up and energize me, and find that thing, that passion. So I know that sounds a little sideways from a career, but I do think that following that passion, following that joy actually leads to better career results.
I think Steve Jobs since said it once. He said, "Follow your passion, and whatever you're passionate about, you will be successful at." Because ultimately, if you're passionate, you will put the time in. You'll be dedicated to it. You will want to learn as deeply as possible, and then ultimately you will be successful. So, yeah, that resonates entirely.
Yeah, I think for me and maybe for others, it sort of fights against a conscientious instinct of, oh, I must do things the right way. I must follow the path. But no, no, no. It's actually the opposite. Like follow the local happiness gradient.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And final question: what would you say is the best advice for someone who's entering the AI and data science field?
It's such a huge field right now. It's so varied. No one person can be an expert in all the things anymore. And so I think that the two things I would say to somebody entering are: one, don't necessarily have preconceptions about what an AI career might be. There's a huge range of things you might do, from very academic, refining theoretical estimates, to building and putting things into practice, to creatively solving problems, to engineering some of the systems to provide those frameworks. There's just a huge variation. And I've seen individuals on my teams, more junior and more senior, who occupy all different parts of that space. And so again, follow that passion, follow that happiness gradient to the part of the field that is interesting to you, and don't feel like there's a right way to be in AI. I will say a solid mathematical foundation never hurts. The second thing I would say is to make sure to get hands on as quickly as possible. And even if you do plan to have an academic career in AI, I think staying in the ivory tower is very limiting. And the sooner that you start actually dealing with real messy data and working your way around some of the challenges posed by working with these tools and these systems, and just finding out sort of those real world challenges, no matter what it is, even if it's a toy problem, the better suited you'll be to understanding the challenges in a career, in any part of the career, and being able to connect it to real societal impact.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think the other thing that I always think about is also going back more to your first point, in the sense of exploring, being curious, trying different areas of the field, and then ultimately finding what fits. So it's been wonderful speaking with you. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining the show. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you? On LinkedIn, on Twitter?
I do not have much of a Twitter presence, but you can find me on LinkedIn, Catherine Williams at Qualtrics.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's been wonderful having you on the show tonight.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Truth Be Known is brought to you by Talend. A leader in data integration and data integrity, Talend Talend enables every company to find clarity amidst the chaos. Talend Data Fabric brings together in a single platform all the necessary capabilities that ensure enterprise data is complete, clean, compliant, and readily available to everyone who needs it throughout the organization. Learn more at talend.com. That's Talend.com.